Hey everyone, and welcome. Today on our channel, we have a podcast about design and designers. On this podcast with my guest Kondrat Kondratenko, we'll be talking about design and life in Serbia. Kondrat is a designer with a ton of experience, both in communication design and in product design. His journey in design includes working as a designer, a studio head, a design team lead at various levels, and then back to being a designer again. It's an interesting path with both upgrades and downgrades. We'll try to find out the reasons as he tells his story. So that brings me to my first question. Kondrat, why design?
Why design?
Yeah. Of all the professions you could have had, you chose design.
It's actually always been that way because even when I was doing something else, I was always tinkering with things in Photoshop in the background. So it just happened naturally. I had an advertising agency. My partner and I were managing it. And very often, well, obviously we were working with the client's budget, not our own. So it turned out there was just no money to pay designers for overtime. But in the morning, for example, you'd have to show the client something and revisions would come in. Of course, they'd come in super late at night, but the presentation is first thing in the morning. So you'd, open the designer's MacBook, his work one, with his permission, of course, open up InDesign and start editing yourself. And then you burn out. Then 2014 hits, the dollar skyrockets, budgets disappear, everything goes up in smoke and things get really tough. And you burn out and you just go freelance, but as a designer this time because you're like, ugh, I don't want to manage anymore. And by the way, you see, this was all the way back in 2014.
So tell me, how did you even start the agency, the design agency back then? Because you had to find clients, you had to sign contracts. Basically, there was a ton of hassle you had to go through just to get started. So what was the story that pushed you to say, I want a design agency, I've got a friend, a partner, and we're going to conquer the design market and become gods?
All us old timers say the same thing. Things were better back in the day. Actually, since I was in management, my future partner and I were working as managers for another ad agency. He landed a client, a really big one, a law firm that worked with like oligarchs. And he brought this client to our boss, but the boss didn't like something, started giving us a hard time, and we basically decided to hell with this. So we just took the client for ourselves, started managing him personally, and left. That's how it happened. And back then, how did we find clients? Also, it was better back in the day, supposedly. This was back in like 2012, 2013. Yandex would give you a commission as an agency. If you registered as one, if you had certified specialists who could run ad campaigns, you'd get a percentage instead of charging the client. A client comes in and an ad campaign costs them, say, 100,000 rubles or 500,000. Through you, it still costs them 100,000 rubles, but you have professionals setting up their ad campaign and you get a kickback from Yandex. Well, not a kickback, it was all official. Yandex would recommend its certified partner agencies, and that's how it worked. It was very easy. You could even set up contextual ads for yourself because there wasn't much competition. You just, without much hassle, create 1,000 keywords, and for those, create 1,000 absolutely identical ads. You upload them to Yandex.direct, pay 5 rubles per click for top positions, and for 500 rubles, or say for 5,000, you get a lead, you talk to them, and with a very high conversion rate, because, well, your service is free for them, you sell them the ad campaign. And then after the ad campaign, you say, oh guys, the conversion rate is bad, which by the way, wasn't a lie, because back then websites were really crappy without any special conversion focused features. Like driving traffic to a corporate website that was considered awesome, just insane. A site where you'd have a phone number at most and maybe a contacts page. And so you offer a landing page. The landing page needs to be designed. And then after the landing page, maybe some other things. The client's happy, you're happy, everyone's thrilled and satisfied, the money's flowing, and it's just super cool. The economy is growing.
Listen, I have some friends who also opened their own agency back then, and one of them managed to earn enough, maybe he'll even appear on our podcast in the future, to buy himself a Lexus and an apartment at the time. Did you manage to do something similar working for yourself, and were you able to achieve something like that as well?
No, I'm too lazy. And I was a bit messy with my work back then. We had a situation where my partner and I just blew $1 million We didn't even know where it went. There was a 1,000,000 ruble hole in our budget. We were like, oh, well, whatever. And it didn't hit us that hard. I mean, it hit us, of course, but it wasn't like a huge problem. The only thing was, as I said, we didn't pay our designers for their overtime because otherwise it would have eaten into our profit margin.
Speaking of the same thing, about margins and overtime, another founder of a creative, let's say, design agency who was based in the regions, in the city of Ryazan. I went there to give a short lecture and I saw how they worked there. But there, to be honest, he hired guys from the Radio Technical University. So basically, you could say he gave them pretty good conditions, but the guys were ready to work until morning without any extra pay. And I saw a situation where a designer comes in and says, I was up all night drawing a room with an air conditioner in it. And everyone applauded him. Well done. That's great.
Well done.
Yeah.
Well, we thought about it this way. Overtime, according to the labor agreement, is paid at double the rate. And that hits the budget pretty hard. Clients aren't always willing to pay you extra for urgent things. So we worked in a simpler way. That's probably why I never earned enough for a Lexus.
Well, I was actually also freelancing back then, and at one point I even wrote a blog post about switching from a fixed rate to an hourly rate. And right away, 90% of my clients just dropped off.
Well, that's a matter of distrust because there's an immediate feeling that you're going to stretch the budget and so on. Man, we're talking so much about agencies, but let me tell you, I have a serious argument regarding a fixed budget for a fixed scope of work. The argument is that as soon as both parties sign such a contract, their interests come into direct conflict because the contractor is interested in doing as little as possible for that fixed amount of money, while the client is interested in getting as much as possible for that fixed amount of money. And that's a problem. And with hourly rates, as I said, there's also a problem, but it works differently because if you're not delivering for that money, well, let's say you're not achieving the results you promised for those hours, it's always noticeable and the arrangement can be terminated in 2 weeks. So you don't have to quit right away. You can give it a try. And if everything works for the client and everything works for you, then it's the best option. After all employment contracts work that way. Your time, they buy 160 hours of your time per month for money. In fact, it's hourly. It's just that a minimum number of hours is already booked for sure.
Well, I worked more with Western clients when I was freelancing, and for them, it's a completely normal situation. They're used to hourly rates, and you bill for a reasonable amount of time, and they pay you reasonably. No one complains. So the Western market at that time was, much more suited for that kind of arrangement. Look, so you were sitting in the studio, opening InDesign, finishing up some work, basically doing the designer's work so you wouldn't have to pay them overtime. And then your time with the studio ended and you decided to become a designer. So what did you study and what does a designer need to know to become a designer and a successful one at that?
It's hard to say. Things were different back then, so it wouldn't be relevant now. But I was self-taught mainly because I would just open other people's finished mock-ups and learn from them, making some edits. To do anything, you have to look at the layers, you have to check the grid, all those kinds of things. You still have to pick colors somehow, depending on what you're doing. And that's inevitable. Looking ahead, I'll say that when I became a freelancer, I was still learning anyway. Back then it wasn't Contraforma. Now it is, but back then it was some other courses. Anyway, Pasha Shishkin was teaching. He had an agency called Shishkin. Such a dumb name, my God. Well, I hope he doesn't hear this. And naturally, they made their own courses. I took typography courses, font courses. We made our own font with Ivan Gladkick. That's Johnny Limonad. I think that's his nickname. He made a lot of fonts for Google Fonts. Right. And looking ahead again, I'll say that I recently finished my master's degree at the Higher School of Economics. And this master's degree for me, well, I didn't exactly need to legitimize myself as a designer, but I wanted to get some additional foundation in design. So you learn your whole life. What's relevant now, just like back then, is that you learn your whole life, but the best way is to learn on the fly, filling in the gaps you see in your work. You can't learn the relevant things. You can't know what will be relevant before you start working.
So based on the results, based on all your, let's say, experience, right? Let's say a designer, a future designer or a junior comes to you and says, so what do I need to know to become a mid-level designer, for example? What knowledge do I need? Yeah, I finished a basic Figma course and I can make landing pages. So what kind of experience is in demand today?
I can only speak for myself again, how I work. Since my service is senior level, it's a little harder for me to talk about what a junior needs to become a mid-level. But as a rule, from my observations, it's always about mindset and autonomy. And if you don't have that, you can try to learn it. It's difficult, but it's possible. Or some kind of business-oriented foundation. If you've finished a Figma course, well, Figma is already quite complex. It's not like a tricycle with a bell, like it was in the beginning, just a rectangle for text. Yeah. So if you've already finished a Figma course, it means you can execute a certain task. If you've taken those courses and you know how flows are built and so on, if you're using a ready-made design system, you can't really mess up too badly. So you can execute tasks, but understanding tasks and working autonomously, that's what you need to learn to become a mid-level. In any case, that comes either from experience. Let's say you have the mindset, but you lack the experience, or you're willing to go to a psychotherapist or some business coach, God forbid, to instill that mindset in yourself. That's one of the most important things. After that, it's about the specifics of the job. Some jobs require more of one thing, some another. Some might ask you to delve deeper into research. It all depends on the competency map of the specific company and the specifics of their tasks.
For a product designer, regardless of their grade, right, is a UI with a wow effect important? That is, the knowledge and ability to create a beautiful UI? Or based on work experience, is it less important because many companies already have design systems and all that stuff? So you're limited in all the patterns and you just come in and create a convenient, high-quality user journey.
The short answer is UI is less important than UX, but the longer answer is that it comes in waves. Some time ago, relatively recently, UI was more important than UX, well, simply from a stereotype perspective. UX has always been very important. Apple succeeded because of it. Many great designers, even before digital design, who made products ergonomics was the foundation. But then things like styles, Bauhaus or not Bauhaus, they were secondary. And well, when basically functional design began. So on the one hand, there's that. On the other hand, it depends on the trends, on the demand from the audience. And UI can have a huge impact on the business if it becomes a competitive advantage. With the same UX, the one that looks more beautiful and more relevant to your aesthetic demand will still win. And there's another, a UX rule. What looks usable is perceived as more usable. What looks beautiful is perceived as more usable. Yes.
There you go. Golden words. I completely agree with you. And the reason I asked this question, since we've started talking about design, is that I received some information from, let's say, meetups that are organized within a large green company. We won't name it, where all the meetups boil down to discussing fonts, buttons, kerning, and that sort of thing. And as the guys told me, they supposedly come to talk about UX, but it all devolves into a banal discussion of, well, of course, the button size, the button color, that's also part of UX, but that's a really low level, right? It's the low level of design. So,
well, yeah, minimal accessibility, size, contrast, according to WSAG. Well, the web standard accessibility guidelines, that's the thing.
Yes. And you start to wonder, so let's say when preparing your portfolio, you're like, whoa, So it turns out you're supposed to show not what you actually did, but something beautiful to get in, to pass the filter of that company's art direction. So you show a half-truth so they'll like you, you get the job, and then you still have to work in that company following the guides that they'll give you. So what's your take on that? Do you agree or disagree with that story?
Let's just say there's as much competition among designers as there is among products, relatively speaking. And you have, well, the question you're asking is literally what I was just discussing with a friend recently. She's also, I apply for jobs from time to time. She applies from time to time. She wants to get into like Facebook or something like that. So we study a lot of other people's portfolios, see what kind of responses they get. We ourselves, I was a lead, she's a lead. So we've both been on the hiring side, more or less. There's this observation that in the hiring manager's user journey, it's critically important. They have a lot of resumes, a lot of applications, especially now. And they see they have to review, say, 50 portfolios. That's a pain. It's a lot, really. And you can't give each portfolio more than a minute, let's say. If you give it more than a minute, your brain just fries by the fifth one. That's it. After that, it's all a blur. You can't effectively filter anything. Whoa, something just collapsed. I don't know if you heard that or not. This cool old house is the bomb. The curse of old houses.
You can tell me about it later.
Yeah, okay. Getting back to it, and you have literally like 3 seconds for them to keep looking at your portfolio. So the content, what you did, the business problems you solved, your UX, your approach, and so on, all of that is super important to keep them interested. But to get that initial interest, it's just like in advertising. There's a great framework, ADA, it still works. It's attention, interest, desire, action. And to attract attention, your packaging definitely has to be better than your competitors. Again, with content and design of the same level, the one that looks nicer will win. Even if the lead is still looking for a position where you'll have to work with a design system within constraints, within visual code constraints.
Listen, that's cool, but I've always had problems with the packaging. I mean, I even had ideas to just go to a cool communication designer, pay them so they could wrap all my projects into beautiful Behance, let's say, projects.
That's what I'm saying. It's the same in business as it is with a product on the market. Meaning they hire separate designers who are qualified to make the product cool, good, useful, and functional. And they hire other designers separately to make it beautiful. It's the same thing here. There's nothing unusual about it.
Listen, well, that story makes sense. You know, the studio, then some training, self-study, courses, then finishing your master's at the Higher School of Economics, which covered your, let's say, some of your gaps, right? You told yourself, yes, I'm a master's graduate and all that. Look, how does a person know if they're a senior or not? How did you realize your senior grade? I mean, did you just wake up one morning, look at the sun, the birds are singing, there's a rainbow, and you're like, well, today I became a senior? Or how did that happen?
Like in video games, you get this glow, level up. There are two paths, two chairs. They work simultaneously. The first is being recognized as a senior in your company. If the company has a clear growth track, you can grow into a senior. Every company has seniors of different levels. I mean, there are companies where, well, I've seen them consider someone a senior for what I wouldn't even call a junior mid-level. My personal, well, internal sort of, grade is when you can solve a large-scale problem. That is, if you can leave a designer on a product completely, like absolutely completely, they don't need an art director, nothing. They'll come and sync up on their own, visually and with everything. If they'll come on their own to the product manager and agree on everything. If they can solve the business and design problem themselves completely from beginning to end and do it on a constant daily basis, then they're a senior. If they can do it for several products, that's just awesome. But as a rule, they're already hiring. They just don't have the capacity. So they hire, well, like seniors and become a lead themselves. well, that's generally how it works.
All right. And you've led so harmoniously into the next question. What motivated you to move forward? What pushed you? I understand that at the studio, you managed an entire studio. The designers, what pushed you to think, why don't I first become a team lead and then the head of design at a major telecom company? What's the magic pill you can take and suddenly, just like that, you're the head of design?
Man, my experience is not going to be relevant to people at all. For me, I was actually resisting leadership, quite the opposite. I mean, at the advertising agency, I was a lead without being a designer, but I was leading like everything together. So both advertising and design, basically, I was responsible for fulfilling obligations to clients, while my partner was responsible for attracting clients. And when I burned out, I became a regular designer, a freelancer, and I was loving it. But then I got a few more clients and I started hiring designers again because I couldn't keep up. Instead of just raising my rates and keeping only like the most important clients, that was a very big mistake. I realized that later because my labor ended up being cheaper when there were many designers and I was left with a lot of cheap clients. I should have just kept the expensive ones and worked as a single designer. Nevertheless, it turned into leadership again. Then I got hired by a company again as a regular individual contributor, as they say now. Again as a designer, and again I ended up as a lead. If people really need to become a lead, then it's a combination of factors. They have to get lucky, of course. They need to work on a product that will inevitably grow in capacity. Meaning, if the product isn't growing in capacity, it makes no sense for the business to make you a lead over anyone. Like, it makes no sense to make the design more powerful. Accordingly, if you start drowning in manual work, that's a clear sign that you need to become a lead. And if you have managerial qualities or some skills, or you're willing to develop them, you can often negotiate. The product is growing, it has more money, it has more needs, and you can negotiate to become a lead. Or the company already has a structure where there are leads, and it's not even, for example, expanding its staff, it's just not expanding the need for more work. And you can grow into a lead just like in any other career. Again, you need to be up to the task. You have to take on leadership functions, even as a senior in advance before you're officially recognized as a lead. And when that position opens up, you'll just be the internal candidate. Instead of them hiring someone from the outside, it's much more profitable to hire a senior who's already doing that a little bit anyway.
Right. Well, that's your experience. I'll tell you a bit about my experience too. At some point when I was already moving toward my 40s, I realized that while I was comfortable in senior positions, I was fine. I could handle tasks independently, tasks of various levels of complexity, but I needed to move on because along with my growth as a senior, the guys who were juniors when I was mid-level were also growing. When I became a senior, they became mid-level. While I'm still a senior, they're catching up. And for example, if I have 10 years of work experience and they have 5, they can already become seniors. So I felt that pressure and I purposefully sought out lead positions. I went to places where no one else would want to take a lead position, but I needed that experience. My career track was like that. And after some careful consideration, I came to the conclusion that the career track should probably have been built just a little bit differently. I should have, at first, created a list of the companies that I truly wanted to work for and move through. Because if you look at my personal experience, it's quite diverse. There's e-commerce and some kind of CRM and all that. And I've seen a successful career track where a person went only through big tech, only the financial sector, only say DomClick, VTB, and Sber, and so on, Alpha, banks, and his probability of finding a job in his later years is higher because that person is more relevant to that business. What do you think? How should one build their career track?
Well, again, let me clarify. I taught first, and then I created my own product designer course at Yandex Practicum, and then watched the guys who graduated. Plus, to gather information for this course about how a designer's career is built. I've seen it many times. that yes, domain expertise is super important. For example, I had a telecom background, so it was much easier for me to get hired at Mango Telecom, where I became a head, because before that, I was at Rostelecom in some kind of lead position. Plus, they hired me for the contact center first, which was like a CRM, because I had built a B2B CRM from scratch at Rostelecom. So it became easier for me, and I became a head there faster for the same reason. I think that Pasha Shumilin, who was leaving, wouldn't have suggested me if I didn't have the right expertise. He would have suggested looking for someone from the outside when he was leaving himself. That's the short version. The long answer, I suppose, is much more complicated, because ageism also plays a role, not so much, some kind of domain expertise. Inevitably, over 10 years, you're bound to stagnate in one domain, on the one hand. But on the other hand, over those same 10 years, if you still want to learn new things and move between domains, then over that time, in 10 to 15 years, you'll have many domains anyway. Specialization is important, but very deep specialization makes you dull.
Right. We're proceeding quite smoothly. You mentioned the head position at Mango Telecom. What would you say you gained in that position, and what did you lose?
Then I don't know if it's just because I've been in the profession for a long time, or if it was specifically about Mango Telecom. Well, in general, it's not good form to badmouth employers, but I have become more cynical when it comes to choosing a job. I mean, work is work. You do it well, you get paid well, and that's it. So my enthusiasm has kind of faded, for things like design will change the world or making a really cool design. Just do the job well, to the best of your ability, within the given constraints. Do what you have to do, and what will be, will be. And in that paradigm, it's probably healthier because you're looking out for yourself more than for some other company, right? That's the most important thing I gained from it. And as for what I lost, it's a kind of, I guess you could say, how you can frame any concept in a positive or negative light, right? I lost my professional naivety.
I agree with you, because we've had a similar experience, a very similar one, yes. I mean, I'd agree that when you're working, at some point you come to the conclusion that, okay, we're not going to conquer mountains, we're not going to take over the world, we're just going to build a ladder step by step that leads the company to the results that are expected of us.
Well, listen, just look at Apple. I mean, that doesn't negate the same principle. It's just that, yeah, if you take away the naivety and that initial fire in their eyes, it feels like the work actually gets done better. If I had to hire someone, for example, even for a top company, I'd be more likely to hire, and again, you can frame this negatively as hiring people whose fire has gone out, but I'd rather frame it positively. I'd rather hire people who are tough as nails, who've already been through the ringer, and they can just, without burning out, do the day-to-day work properly, without complaining, without giving anyone a headache. And they have the qualifications for it. They already have the right mindset. They're monetizing their labor. It seems to me that money is a normal motivation.
I'd agree with that.
When someone says change the world, I either don't believe them, or I think they're not yet a mature enough candidate. Sure, go ahead, change the world at Apple, but you're still going to have to be tough as nails, or you'll burn out and be gone.
As you were talking, it reminded me, recently I was looking for people for a team lead position, and I wasn't interviewing alone. We had team representatives. Sometimes the decision makers would join, and sometimes actually even the CPO would participate in the interview for the team lead position. Or, well, yes, he really does like, let's say, to actively participate in all the processes. In general, and I say this as tactfully as possible, in general, the story is as follows. That is, I personally chose directly. Well, probably it's my age. Maybe my experience speaks for itself. I chose guys who were without. There was a truly crazy, almost wild gleam in the eyes. And right there, without any stories or explanations about how we are now going to make products, there was just this overwhelming sense of wow, 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 we will absolutely be the best. I specifically chose people who already know how to work efficiently. They are the kind of people who can go from point A to point B without hesitation. I know exactly how long they have to go, and I also know what is needed for this journey to be successful. But yes, everything is fine. But from the side of the people who also interviewed me, they had a slightly different view. We need people who can speak beautifully and sell beautifully. I don't really know or fully understand what exactly this is connected with or what the underlying reason for this might be. Because, you see, I don't evaluate artistry or artistic qualities in the traditional sense. I evaluate their I don't know, their not picturesqueness or visual appeal, but something else entirely. Yes, I did appreciate the dance. I truly did. If a person dances, if a person genuinely knows how to dance, that means we can all, without hesitation, invite him to work with us. If he dances, he will talk less, dance more, and dance more, focusing on movement rather than words. Well, in general. I think that's the essence of what I wanted to say.
Do you organize your resume? I don't want to say that I don't want to. Can you sing your resume?
Well, yes, and to be completely honest with you, when I interviewed various participants coming from a range of different backgrounds, and sometimes I was genuinely convinced that competencies are truly very important in the workplace. If you're a team leader, if you're a manager, or if you possess the skills required to conduct interviews, it's important to understand who can ask what questions and who cannot. For example, let's say I won't ask the team lead level questions at the junior level because that would not be appropriate. Similarly, I won't ask junior level questions at the team lead level, as that would not be suitable either. But when I hear a team lead, someone who is supposed to be experienced and knowledgeable, being asked very basic junior level questions, something like a whiteboard challenge or a simple coding exercise, it really triggers me. And honestly, it really worries me about the integrity of my, let's say, brain, my own mental sharpness and abilities. And speaking of that, interviews and all that, please tell me, how did you interview people? And then later on, how did you go through interviews yourself? Because you just sort of threw in the towel and said, I don't want to be a department head, I want to be a designer. So what was it like from your perspective as an employer and from the perspective of someone looking for a job as a designer?
Listen, actually, while you were talking, I picked out a few different questions. Let's clarify now which one you mean.
Go ahead.
If I understood correctly, you want me to share my experience of hiring people and being hired myself?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll start a little from afar again because I need to provide some context. Otherwise, it won't be clear what I'm talking about. I'll just sound like a madman, just babbling like a village idiot. So I always need to explain what I'm talking about at the start. There are two competencies, and they're very different. The first competency is building a career, and the second is doing the work. And just as you said, I can tell this is a real pain point for you. I'll break it down. I'll even go a little deeper into this context now, which we touched on a bit earlier regarding the dancing part. There's a parable, I don't remember which book it's from, some kind of business coaching book, God forgive me, but it's a really great metaphor. I teach it to my students too. So there's, let's say, a master, and he's teaching children how to make pots. And he runs an experiment. He gives one group the task of making the absolute best piece of pottery possible. And it doesn't matter how. And the second group, he gives them the task of making as much pottery as possible, just by weight. The more kilograms you produce, the better. And in the end, after a certain amount of time, the ones who were being graded by weight made much better pottery. Well, simply because they had more attempts, they didn't care about the quality. The quality improved simply because they kept trying. Right. But the ones whose task was to make the highest quality piece, they were stuck trying to perfect it in one go. They were trying to get it perfect in a single attempt, to polish it and get it right, and so on. So yes, the person who repeated the same task many times and then switched to another. Besides breadth, depth is also important. See, now I'm talking in reverse. Right. The question is about the competency of building a career. In the corporate world, very often, unfortunately, the people who get ahead are the ones who only know how to build a career, but don't really know how to do the work. That's probably natural for human societies in general. So there's nothing wrong with that in principle. You just need to keep it in mind and develop that competency as well. And I'll jump right to how I conducted interviews and how I was interviewed. When you're interviewing someone, you have an idea in your head of what task the person needs to cover. And let's call it a competency map, or not a competency map. In principle, it's not super important what other things they can do in design. It's cool if they can do more, but if they're going to be a specific brick, like you need to fill capacity in the backlog or in Jira, and as a lead, you know what competencies are needed to do that as well as possible. And naturally, you select people based on that criterion. You save your own time and others' time, and you increase the probability that the person you hire will solve the problem or solve it more effectively. Not everyone hires that way. I know that for a fact. Very often when a lead is inexperienced or when a person just doesn't bother too much with doing their job well, they just use frameworks. It's a completely templated interview. And when you're the one being interviewed, you can spot this. First of all, you can figure it out. No matter what type of lead is interviewing you, you can figure it out by asking questions yourself, which, by the way, earns you points. Questions that help you and the interviewer formulate exactly what kind of tasks you'll be doing. Not just all the ones described, in the resume, they're all described the same way. But specifically, like, can you give me an example of a task from the backlog? Let's say one that's already been completed or something. And you'll be able to see what competencies are required for that and highlight your own relevant ones. You're helping the lead to understand. Even if they don't know how to do it, you can help them. That's the first part. The second part is precisely about the skill of building a career. If the lead is the type who hires based on frameworks, again, you can help them understand how well you fit. You don't try to stretch the truth or lie, but simply choose what concisely shows that you'll solve the problem well, that specific problem. As for other skills, well, they can ask, but like, what's the difference? And so if the lead is the type who hires based on some framework and not for a specific task, you need to know the rituals of those frameworks. Meaning for them, it's, like a checklist. Did you pass that checklist or not? But that is the skill of building a career. It's not the skill of working. Meaning an incompetent person can pass a checklist like that if they just learn the right answers. And that's how I got hired and how I hired people.
Listen, that's cool. Look, so basically I lived in Moscow, worked in Moscow. I was developing my career as a designer, became a head of design, then went back to being a designer. And then all of a sudden I get this update from you. I'm in Serbia. Hey, look, I bought a huge house that's 100 years old with a plot of land. And the question is why? What made you do it?
Is it safe for us to talk about this?
Well, you can be, let's say, a bit more vague about it. So a certain event happened. We won't say which one. And I decided, well, why don't I try living somewhere abroad? And so you chose Serbia. Why Serbia? Why the countryside? Why a house? I mean, that's a lot of whys. I mean,
Okay, I used to work at Yandex Practicum. And when, let's say, it became uncomfortable to work for Russian companies, I was working for the international Yandex Practicum. It split off. It's now Nebius Group, which belongs to Volosh. And the international practicum wasn't associated with it, like the capital, the organizations, everything was separate. They split the technology and the people, and its headquarters, or one of them, is located in Belgrade. And I was working for them remotely at first, and I would come here for a strategic session. And I just got so wildly into it. I liked Serbia so much. Like, there's this nuance that until you come here, you have this feeling that it's some, like, Serbia, where's that? And I'll digress a little. I was very ashamed at first because it turns out Serbs know everything about Russians. They really love Russians. They are really up on everything that's happening with us, and they consider us a brotherly nation. It turns out because, let's say, our country helped them, starting with the Russian Empire, then the Soviet Union constantly. In some difficult situations, it turns out we, to the South Slavs, well, most likely there were some political interests, but nevertheless, the Serbs remembered it. It's in their history textbooks. But I knew pretty much nothing about Serbia. And I had a guilt complex. I really felt like I was like, oh God, how embarrassing, Lord, in front of them. So then it passed. Serbia is a lot like us. Serbs are very similar to us, and that affects how comfortable it is to live here, because integration and assimilation are much easier. Also, to jump ahead a bit, I'll say that while there are a lot of Russians here, a very small percentage of them actually integrate for some reason. I don't know why. Apparently, since there are so many of them, they've formed their own bubbles and kind of live in this little Russia within Serbia. So that was the first question, why Serbia? Yandex Practicum later became 1010, but I left that job, but I still thought it would be cool to leave the country anyway. I wasn't very comfortable. And out of all the options, Serbia seemed like a great choice. It's both easier and it's more fun to live here for me. For me, day-to-day comfort is very important, meaning I don't need to, and maybe this will bother some people, but I don't need to set some huge long-term goals. You'll get much further and achieve more if every day you have the energy and the desire to do what needs to be done. And for that to happen, you always have to be, well, let's not say in super comfort zone, discomfort zone. But at the very least, you shouldn't be spending an irreplaceable resource. You should only spend replenishable resources so you can always be a person with resources. So I realized that I could probably move to any other country through sheer force of will, but what would happen after that, I don't know. I'd probably feel awful later on. And from what I've seen, that's what happens to a lot of people. In Serbia, I won't feel awful. I can live here calmly for a long time, so to speak. I didn't even get the so-called immigrants blues, which they say people get after 3 to 6 months. Right, getting back to the house and the countryside. It turned out that a house in Serbia is very cheap. I'm not a rich person. Again, I used to squander a lot of money. I had a mortgage and I sold the property. Naturally, a part of it was already paid off. And with the money from the sale, I paid off the debt and I had a little money left over. So that's why I bought a house. And it was super cheap here, but it's very old, which is why it was so cheap. Being in the countryside also affected the price. Serbia is a small country, and for me to get to Belgrade by car to some apartment there, and you have to drive for half an hour just to get across Belgrade, for me, it's 2 hours door to door by car. Well, something like 2 hours and 7 minutes. So I don't know about calling it the countryside. Plus, this is a completely different autonomous region. It's like they're structured completely differently. There's the autonomous province of Vojvodina, where the capital is Novi Sad. They even have their own parliament. So I'm driving from the north of one province to the very center of Serbia, and it only takes me 2 hours. So by Russian standards, heck, I used to commute an hour to work in Moscow. For Serbs, of course, this is the middle of nowhere. Second, the place where I live, there are a lot of Russians here. The standard of living is much higher here than in the rest of Serbia, probably for the same amount of money. Because here, where I live, it's a Hungarian village. Almost everyone here is Hungarian. And Subotica is a city situated in the northern part of Serbia, right near the border with Hungary. It is one of those places where, as you move through the city, you eventually reach a point where the urban area comes to an end, and that is exactly where the border with Hungary begins. If you have the opportunity, for example, to get a visa, a multi-entry visa, and so on, that's cool. It's kind of like the high-speed train between St. Petersburg and Moscow. You were just talking about 2 hours, and I still live in Russia within the Russian scale of things. Not long ago, I went to Karelia, and it took me half a day to get there from Moscow, of course.
For Vojvodina, it's like the Leningrad Oblast, which is a region in Russia surrounding St. Petersburg, as both serve as important administrative areas within their respective countries. Well, let me see.
I commuted 2.5 hours one way every day from Moscow Oblast.
I used to commute 2.5 hours each way every day from the Moscow Oblast to work.
I commuted daily from Moscow Oblast.
And I remember that I used to commute to work 2.5 hours one way every day from the Moscow Oblast. So basically, I commuted for work. The job situation that's affecting everyone now, has it touched you, and what can you say about it?
Well, honestly, there's not much to say because this is the first time I've seen anything like this. And so any opinion I have would be, well, just as relevant because my experience is like just as irrelevant as anyone else's. Nobody has seen this before. Nobody knows what's going on. So there's that. Some people complain about artificial intelligence, but I disagree. That's like saying that when Photoshop or Figma came out, the job market collapsed. It's the same thing. It's just a tool. So yeah, that's why I can't really say anything. Yes, it has become very difficult to find a job.
So what steps, for instance, right now I'll ask about your experience and then I'll share my own and the experience of the guys I talk with. What steps are you taking, let's say, to find a new job?
Well, first of all, I've adjusted my experience. I don't say anymore that I've been working in design for 11 years. For some reason, that's a red flag for many employers. I don't want to be a lead, I don't want to be a manager because, again, the comfort of my work is important to me. And it turns out it's much more comfortable for me to work as a designer. Let me go a little deeper again, if I may, because this is important. Once you become a senior, which is typically your final year, you have, let's say, two main paths, two character development branches. The first branch is management. The second branch is deepening your expertise, meaning you become an even better designer, like beyond a senior. In international companies, this is often called a principal designer, for example. So I can tell you that Johnny Ive, for example, he remained a designer. He wasn't a manager. He probably did manage, but he did the core design work himself. This is important because in that case, it's just more comfortable. You know, you see the results of your work. For some people, that's not as important, but for me, it's very important. When I'm managing, I get really tired and I don't see the results of my work. And that doesn't allow me day to day, every day, to get up in the morning and want to do my job. Because if you don't get that reinforcement, that's how the brain is wired. For me, there's no reinforcement there. For someone else, there's reinforcement in management. Accordingly, I adjusted my experience. I removed the lead experience and left only the design experience because you need to be relevant to the employer. I left only what's relevant. That's the first thing. Second, the portfolio is very important. Now, more than ever, I've noticed that if I get rejections, without an interview invitation, most of the time, those rejections are because of my portfolio. I'm too lazy to work on it, but I have to. So accordingly, I'm slowly starting to work on it now. So I guess the most important takeaway is this. Make a resume that's as relevant as possible. And tweak your portfolio so that it, reflects your actual skills.
Speaking of embellishing experience, I'd like to add something. I'll tell you two stories. We touched on this a bit in our Telegram chat. I was writing about it, but for the people who will be watching us, I think these stories will be interesting. Story number one. A designer comes in for an interview, and during the interview, he starts reminiscing about the days when he used to create interfaces in Photoshop. So that was clearly 15 years ago.
At least it wasn't CorelDRAW.
Yeah.
I actually used to make designs in CorelDRAW for what it's worth, even back in 2014, because it was vector-based. Oh, sorry, please continue.
In 2014, I was making designs in Illustrator because it was vector-based. I even have a video course recorded on my channel called Creating an App Design, and I'm drawing it in Illustrator. Anyway.
Illustrator even had components back then.
Right. So anyway, this person comes in and is reminiscing about Adobe Photoshop, what he used to do there. And they ask him, so how many years have you been in the profession if you're reminiscing about designing interfaces in Photoshop? He says, and what if I had said 15 years, would you have invited me for an interview? And the HR person tells him, no, we wouldn't have invited you for an interview. He goes, exactly. My real experience is 8 years. Everything before that is irrelevant work experience. And that's that. So that's the first telling story. Second story. Someone came to me for a designer position for an interview who had inflated his work experience to 7 years. This situation happened just recently. And by chance, he was found online on LinkedIn and other places. And there was a proper profile of a design director who worked, well, obviously not for the best company in the world, but still he was a design director and had been for quite a few years. And plus, his age was also a factor. He was already somewhere over 40. And so he downplayed his experience and he no longer looked like a young man, in short. And it was, I felt really sad. I can be an empathetic person. I mean, sometimes, although in theory, after so many years in design management positions, empathy should just be burned out of you. But sometimes that empathy, it shows through. And you could see how he, because he was apparently rarely invited for interviews, how nervous he was. And then during the conversation, when they gave him a task to solve, like a regular designer, a whiteboard challenge, he opened up, started joking, doing some things. He calmed down a bit. And in short, he went through the interview. I won't tell you the results because you never know what the decision will be. But in general, that anxiety, that difficulty of finding a job at an older age, and then that head of design title, which is like a brand on you or a lead, it's very, very sad because they might not hire you because they think, aha, he was a manager and now he'll come in and start eyeing my job, for example, right? I'm sitting here comfortably as an art director or head of design, and I'm hiring someone who will be my competitor, for example. Why would I need someone like that? Or maybe, he's managed a lot of people, which means he's not very, easy to work with. He has his own opinions. It's probably better to hire someone younger so that, someone I won't have to prove my authority to. So that he'll just listen and do his tasks. And so you have tons and tons of these red flags in the employer's mind, and people who have climbed that high but want and are able to work without downplaying their experience, they just get an automatic rejection. I guess something like that. And look, right now you're looking for a job or you found a job, but in this current crisis situation, well, from your observations, is the competition generally high or low? because over those 12 years, 13 years of your experience, a lot of new specialists have entered the field. So are they not competitors? And the main thing is to get past the HR filter, and then you can work things out directly with the lead.
Hugh? Well, you've actually said a lot. Yeah, let's see. There is indeed such a phenomenon. First of all, ageism, that goes without saying. I guess it exists in any profession. And since there's this sort of cult of achievement, which is exactly what I've already given up on, and to hell with all of it. I'll achieve everything I need to at a calm pace without all the stress and hysterics. But because there's this cult of achievement, it's like people expect you to become an incredible specialist by the time you're 25. And if you're 40 and you want to be a designer, it's possible. Well, I mean, right now we're just making some assumptions. For example, what you said about a person worrying, they'll hire someone who's a better manager than they are. These are all just assumptions. We're kind of making this up as we go. Well, I can add to that and say that such a specialist looks as if they're like unsuccessful because, well, he hasn't made it. But the fact that he has achieved much different, much cooler things, or just went through psychotherapy, that's a whole other story. And we can also add something here that isn't just our speculation, but is practically guaranteed, which is that there are these, again, corporate rituals, and they are very well established. And you can't get away from them. So you either play by these rules or, well, it's a shame, sorry, goodbye. And here, too, you have to somehow figure out for yourself how to handle this story. I don't know, twist your experience. Like you said, you can try to sell yourself to the lead as a more qualified employee and so on. Here, there's no single solution. It always depends on the situation. If you really, really need this specific position, you can study up on certain things beforehand. You can try to first, before answering questions, do some reconnaissance, ask your own questions. I guess those are the solutions. There's no other way. And I can say that we're not getting any younger either in the entire market. So on the market, there will be more and more guys who are, say, 50 years old, a 50-year-old designer. And I used to be afraid of that, but now I understand that, well, besides me, there will be a ton of 50-year-old designers. Maybe it will become the standard, so it will be absolutely okay. The market is immature. Designers, well, it's not that it's immature, it's relatively new. So interface designers, specifically specialized ones, not web designers, but interface designers, they appeared, I guess, about 10 or 15 years ago. So the very first designers who started at 20 are now like 35, maybe 40. The ones who can be called product designers, UX designers, and so on. Right. And so it turns out that the average age, I mean, people have been getting into the field for all these 15 years, becoming designers. Some were graduating from universities, and so on. 15 graduating classes. Just imagine some kind of design. So it turns out that probably my thought is, and by the way, more and more people wanted to get into it. Therefore, most likely the average age of candidates is still like under 30, 25, for example. And this affects, well, like, I don't know, 80% are under 27, right? And like 20% are over 27. This possibly affects perception. That's also my assumption. We'll have to wait and see. Artificial intelligence will throw us all out anyway. I'm kidding. It won't throw anyone out. Only those who try to stay as web designers. Well, I mean, there will just be a new reevaluation of the profession, like from web designer to UX designer. But there will be a similar reevaluation, but time will pass. I'm sure the market will become more mature overall in terms of the average age of candidates, and everything will be fine.
You said that quite optimistically. I actually thought the same thing, that I got into design a bit earlier, actually. My first project, probably when I coded some little website, was in the year 2000. I remember it clearly, the year 2000, HTML plus CSS, but I never thought I would be doing design. So at some point, I'm also thinking I'm getting older along with the market. of design in Russia and so on. But apparently, I also thought that when I'm roughly speaking 40, 44 or 45, there will be quite a lot of people like me around. And I come across this. In articles on LinkedIn, I read articles by guys who are also worried. Somehow, some head of design has been looking for a job for 6 months and he just wants to work. So he's also like, I was counting on the fact that at 45, there would be a lot of us and they would hire people like that. But unfortunately, there's some kind of screening, he worries. I also hope that the situation will change, that ageism will shift a little to the side. And probably when these crisis situations end, we'll start living again, because I've been through several crises, including in design. The crisis of 2008, when they just fired all the designers from marketing, the market was flooded with them. And salaries, for example, in 2008, my friend had a salary of 80,000 rubles.
That's a lot for 2008. That's just insane.
That's what he negotiated. That was his salary. On Headhunter, I found salaries of 60, 70,000. For designers, there was no division into UX, UI. They were like 60, 70,000. I mean, the salaries. The year 2008, the crisis of 2008 cut that in half. I mean, I was growing because I had just started working in this field. So I went from 25,000 to 30, and the person fell from 80 to 35.
Listen, that's normal. It's the market. A matter of supply and demand. If a bunch of people were fired, budgets were cut. I mean, it's not even that. It's just that the company has the opportunity to hire cheaper, so it will hire the same specialists for less.
Yes, and to get back to the level of 80,000, the one that existed in 2008, they had to go through 4 years until 2012. And by then, the level was somewhere around 80 to 90,000 for a designer. Well, that's
much less than in 2008, just radically less.
Well, yes, considering the dollar exchange rate, considering inflation. I mean, back then, everything was great for him. His wife also earned well, and they pooled their money. They got a mortgage for an apartment, bought 2 cars, because cars there cost up to $1 million. Renovations.
Just invent a time machine, that's all, and pay for the heating.
Well, yes.
Well,
so these kinds of crisis situations, and now I'm also observing. I remember I made a selection from one resource about money for designer positions, lead positions from 4 years ago or even 5 years ago. And just recently I made the exact same selection, and I realized that the difference in salaries is 20%. So in 5 years, they started paying 20% more.
Inflation since then has probably been 50%, I don't know.
Yes, I mean,
how to set goals in life. By the way, a thought came to me. I want to develop it a bit. I have an analogy with other more mature markets. And for example, let's imagine a very similar market, architecture, because there's ergonomics and other things about usability. It's absolutely the same. If you look at physical space, like digital space, similarly, right? So that it's convenient for a person so they can solve their tasks and want this product. Probably like the design of various interior items, small architectural forms, large architectural forms. An architect aged 50 to 60 is considered perfectly normal. That's okay. And I'll also add that probably for those who are young now, due to competition, difficulties also arise, because most of the vacancies I see, damn, I've been talking for so long, my voice is shot. They are for positions requiring 3+ years of experience. So the guys and gals who have just decided to get into design have run into this situation again. Work experience is required, but where do you get that work experience if work experience is required everywhere? 3 to 5 years, for example. So yeah, nobody wants guys with over 15 years of experience, and nobody wants guys with under 3 years either. Well, relatively speaking, even those with more than 8 years are rarely needed. Based on this, I think that in any case, everything will depend only on how much capacity for designers companies will need. And only that. That's the first thing. And second, architects probably didn't get to this point right away either. And I have a feeling that companies that aren't trying to hire someone more experienced, I mean, here too, age doesn't really matter much, nor does the amount of experience. If your experience is relevant and you're good at solving problems, again, if you pass the interview as someone who can handle these specific tasks, this particular set in the Jira backlog, the specific tasks that require specific skills, if you have 10 years of experience and you're better than the guy with 15 years of experience, they'll hire you. If you have 10 years of experience and you're better than a guy with 5 years of experience, they'll hire you. But only in that situation, and if you can present it correctly. And I'm sure that companies operating in the market in a competitive environment will have a competitive advantage if they hire this way. This will resolve itself naturally. For example, sexism is still very prevalent in the industry now, but there's much less of it than 10 years ago. Much less. I can't imagine that back in 2015, most companies were hiring women and men on an absolutely equal basis. Now it's more of the norm. It's not that widespread. There's still hidden sexism, but there's much less of it. So I'm still optimistic in this regard. The market will mature, competition will sort it out. Well, I mean, again, it doesn't matter how many years you've been doing it. What's important is that you're competitive and you show it correctly.
Can you work and perform the tasks that are assigned to you?
Achieve business tasks.
Yes, achieve business goals, which must be clearly formulated. All right. Well, that's a story about setting tasks and forming business goals. That's a slightly different story, although product designers do influence that. I'd like to move on probably to the end of our conversation. Of course, it's been great, and we could probably talk for 3 hours about anything.
Absolutely.
Don't you want to return to Russia?
That's a very difficult question. For now, probably not. And it's just because I can explain. I'm not going to sell anything to anyone right now or try to convince anyone of anything. But right now, Russia's economy is operating on credit very heavily. And many things that previously could have been forgiven just due to volume, even if the current situation, the current crisis ends. The recovery, paying back this debt without defaults for the economy. I'm not an economist, but I'm sure any economist will confirm this for you. It will take many, many years. That is, in Russia, you'll only be able to feel comfortable in very wealthy companies, and things will be worth more than you are, because you, as a person, will be paying off the debt for the state, for the government. And that's very difficult, actually, for me right now to somehow say that I want to return to such a situation. I'd probably be better off moving on somewhere else. I'll return if I see, well, you might think I'm some kind of opportunist, but I'll definitely return if I see some functional improvements for myself, for my future. For example, if I want to have children, I don't have any. I'm glad I haven't had them yet. Well, sort of. But in the current situation, I wouldn't want to raise children in Russia. And what happens next? Well, we'll see.
Listen, that's cool. And finally, what can you wish for the designers who will be watching this video? I'm sure it won't just be designers. But what can you... Well, our channel is about design, right? We were talking about design, although we touched on life a bit. What can you wish for the designers?
Well, I hope that some of the designers who watch this don't hate me for this advice, because they might immediately think a well-fed person won't understand a hungry one. I'll say right away that I'm not exactly rolling in it right now, but I advise you guys to worry more about your own lives and less about your careers. Yes, it sucks to live without money. If you don't have much, that also sucks, but you are with yourself forever. You, as a specific individual, and your competencies, everything that happens to you will be with you until the very end of your life, an inalienable part of you.
But your career and your money are always temporary. That's a great point. I can confirm from the height of my experience, made wise by the years and my gray hair, I can confirm the thing that Kondrat just told us. Try to fix the car so it can keep going. Well, I want to thank you for telling us so many interesting things. I asked some questions, got to know you a little better, although I already knew quite a bit about your career and your life since we talk all the time. It was very interesting and I think informative. I'll probably we'll see what contact info to leave here, either a QR code for Telegram or a link to LinkedIn. I mean, I'll figure it out when I'm editing this video. So, guys, subscribe to the channel. And so if we post Kondrat's contact info, go to those links. Yes, so you can ask questions there, maybe. Yeah, I'm happy to answer in a private message. Go ahead, ask whatever you want. I don't mind. Yes, I mean, because it's very cool when people want to share their experience, their knowledge, and their opportunities. So it'll most likely be a QR for Telegram. Well, anyway, we'll see. And go for it. Subscribe, definitely comment on the video because my channel has kind of died down, let's say, and there's very little organic traffic right now. So comments, likes, subscriptions, they'll boost it. It's a way to support the channel. Yes, yes, yes. Be a friend. Yes. Film. Yes, show it. All right. Anyway, bye everyone. See you soon.